Okay, well, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. It's so great to see you here this evening. My name is John Brown, and I am the Dean of the School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to introduce this evening's festivities, activities, discussion. I was in Ottawa earlier this week attending the Governor General Awards in architecture, and had the privilege of meeting our Governor General Mary Sims, who, as you know, is the first Indigenous Governor General, and it was an honor, and it was profoundly moving. And it was also amazing that one of the 12 winners this year is an Indigenous architect, Alfred Waugh, from the West Coast, whose project, Residential School Historical Interpretive Center at the UBC campus, was awarded. He was the first Indigenous architect to receive a Governor General's award, which was also noteworthy. And it made me think that, you know, we are making strides at a structural level, at a big level, but they're still at our professional levels and in our personal levels, we still need to think about truth and reconciliation. We have a long way to go, and we need to think about the Indigenous peoples who have stewarded this land for many thousands of years, and that stewardship is core to the beliefs that we as architects, planners, and landscape architects have about the way we look after the environment. We work with the environment, we work for the good of people. And all of those lessons are profound, and something that's something that we as professionals need to remember, and then as individuals we need to remember that we're also here on the land of the people of Treaty 7, the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, and also the Métis Nation Region 3, which calls Calgary home. And that we need to recognize that we are sharing this land, that we are privileged to be here as visitors, and all of the ways in which we need to build paths together. So now let me introduce the panelists for the evening. The first really doesn't need any introduction, but I need to do that anyways because it's appropriate. Our mayor, Jyoti Gondek, was sworn in as Calgary's 37th mayor, and the first woman to be elected to this role on October 25th, 2021. Prior to being elected as mayor, she served as city councillor for Ward 3 from 2017 to 2021, and she holds a PhD in urban sociology and an MA in organizational sociology. And Mayor Gondek and I taught for a couple of terms together back in the distant past, and it was a lovely experience. Throughout her career, Mayor Gondek has taken a big picture approach to pressing challenges. Often, she has found processes and policies exist simply because they have never been questioned. She has come to understand that by probing and chipping away at issues, we move forward with improvements that have meaning in our everyday lives. Many challenges face Calgarians, including the economic recovery, the climate crisis, lack of affordable housing, truth and reconciliation, and women's participation in the labor force. Mayor Gondek believes that solutions to these issues must be bold and rooted in economic, social, and environmental resilience. I second that for sure. The next panelist is Joe Case, who's the Vice President of Mattamy Homes. Joe has 16 years of experience in the development industry between Mattamy Homes and his previous position, developing Elbow Valley in Rocky View County. He has managed many different aspects of the land development business and has pushed the boundaries of innovative community design and sustainable residential development in each of the communities that he has been a part of. Joe sits on the BUILD Board of Directors, where he works collaboratively with municipalities across the Calgary region on policy that is critical to growth in both an urban and suburban context. In his role as Vice President of Land Development, he oversees all of Mattamy's actively developing and future communities across Alberta. Welcome, Joe. Okay. Stay seated. You're from out of the mayor yet? All right. Okay. All right. So, June Williamson is our guest from afar, architect and professor of architecture at the Spitzer School of Architecture. June is a registered architect and professor of architecture at the Spitzer School of Architecture, which is at the City College of New York, or CUNY. She is an international expert on suburban retrofitting, also known as the uses of good urban design in the redevelopment, re-inhabitation, and re-greening of obsolete suburban built form. Along with Ellen Dunham-Jones, Williamson is the co-author of the 2021 Great Places Award-winning book, Case Studies in Retrofitting Suburbia, Urban Design Strategies for Urgent Challenges, a long-awaited sequel to the first book in the series called Retrofitting Suburbia, Urban Design Solutions for Redesigning Suburbs. Next on the panel is Al-Karim Divani, president of Round Square. Al-Karim's vision is to help create diverse and accessible communities by providing more housing within established neighborhoods. He wants to connect more people to the simple pleasures of living in a walkable neighborhood full of vibrant local businesses and existing infrastructure. Seated in his hometown of Calgary, he is committed to improving the urban life and connection of people everywhere. As president of Round Square and a sessional instructor at the Haskayne School of Business, his passion and ideas are rooted in his work. Emphasis is placed on living, access, and creating sustainable homes where people can make it all fit. In addition, Al-Karim is a voting board member of Detox, a partner at NHBR Coffee and No Island Co-work, places to connect with his community and maintain a pulse on the needs of Calgarians. Last but not least, we have Alex Ferguson, Senior Vice President for Anthem Properties. Alex has over 22 years experience in BC and Alberta, specializing in residential real estate. And over that time, he has held various executive roles and co-founded 2 development companies, Gablecraft Homes in 2010 and Pattern Plus in 2021. Since 2010, he was responsible for the completion of 1,100 homes in Calgary, Vancouver Island, and Okanagan. The built forms included single-family duplex villas, townhomes, low-rise, mid-rise, and high-rise apartments. Other responsibilities include development of master planned communities and new rental housing. In 2022, Alex joined Anthem Properties Group with a dual role contributing to the vertical development, multifamily, and the capital formation group. Welcome to our panelists. And now I'll pass the mic over to the moderator, Professor Francisco Alaniza Uribe, assistant professor, soon to be associate professor at the School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape in the planning program.
Thank you. How much table I have here. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. This is a great crowd for today. I think everybody's quite interested in this topic. I'm for sure. And I'm very grateful for the panel members to agree to be today with us. I want to frame a little bit of the background of how this came to be as a discussion panel and for this lecture series. And a little bit about myself that kind of triggered that curiosity. From the first time I arrived in Calgary, this was around 18 years ago. I arrived in a flight at night, so I couldn't see much of the city. And when I jumped on the taxi and was driving to where I was going to stay with a friend, I kept thinking, where is the city? I was driving, Deerfoot, I didn't know where it was at the time, and then John Dory, and I just couldn't feel the city yet. And very quickly after John Dory, I arrived at my destination where I was going to stay. But this question remained with me for a while, and as a research question also to trying to answer this. And through the days with that first stay, I tried to walk between 2 bookstores in the Northwest. It took me an hour to go from the university to Dalhousie. There was no LRT at the time going in that direction, so this is quite far back. But this idea of the city really imprinted in myself as a question, because I come from Mexico, where the density. Is that a cheer? Oh, is that better? Better. Okay, thank you. So, coming from Mexico City, and from Monterrey, where I'm from, this density and the city meant something different to me, right? So as arrived in Calgary, and I have been now working here at the university for quite a few years, some of these questions have come as a part of my research is to understand that living closer together, a more compact city, tends to have a lot of benefits, not only for us and but also for the environment. So of those benefits for us, for example, when we live closer together, then we have the ability to walk more, to walk to destinations, to walk to see our friends, and especially some of us that we don't drive. I lived in the city for 4 years without a car, so I had that experience as well. But seniors, young kids, immigrants like myself at that time, that you don't drive, it has the limitations of enjoying that city in that respect. You can't visit your friends so easily. You don't have a lot of destinations to go to. And it also has the impact on kids, that it is harder for them to walk to school, for example, right, when we have more spread out communities. So it has significant impacts in terms of how we experience that socially and in terms of physical health as well. It also has impacts on how we spread our resources when it comes to money. And infrastructure costs a lot. So if we think about that, if we're more spread out, we have to spread out our dollars for more area to maintain this infrastructure. And this is in many respects, right? I remember, well, when I started driving, I started to experience this problematic thing about snow plowing. Hi, this is Francisco. So now, I remember that particular concept of, oh, my street is not loud, I have snow here. If we think about that, all the city in Calgary, we have to, with our taxes, maintain and keep those roads clear in the snow. That's a lot of surface, that's a lot of infrastructure. And it's the same for pipes, moving water around, it's the same for moving vehicles around. So it has a real impact when it comes to financial sustainability of our infrastructure. And we know that for environment, it's also problematic. Around 20 to 22,000 kilometers a year we drive as average Calgarians. But if you live closer to the downtown, that can be cut down to around 6, 7, even less if you don't have a car at all, right? So there's a big difference in terms of how we move around depending on how fortunate we are to be close or far from some of these amenities. So it is quite important to understand how do we change this pattern of growth that we have. For the past few decades, we have been going in a certain direction, but we now understand that we need to be quite aggressive and innovative in changing some of the ways that we make decisions about urban growth. So that's where this panel came to be. And again, really grateful to have you guys here because you are key actors on the development process. We all have a part to play. But rarely, I think, we have the opportunity to have this mix of key actors in the development process that can talk about their experience, their lens, because development is a complicated process. It takes many years, so to change the way we do things is also going to take a while, and it's going to take many voices to get us there. So thanks again for being here. We have, as part of the format of the panel, we have around 5 minutes for each one of our panel members to state their position on this, give them some homework to think about, that they might want to express their views on this. So Mayor Gondek, if you would be so nice to get us started with that, that'd be great.
Thank you. Still not working? Oh, thank you. Thanks very much for inviting me to be on this panel. And I think I'm going to give the political perspective because that's probably a good thing for me to do. I think what happens sometimes is when you put decisions in the hands of people who are elected by other people, sometimes our judgment gets clouded by the fact that we may have a desire to keep our communities happy, we may have desires to get reelected. And that's where the tricky business of land development and community building comes in. I can tell you the number of times that I've heard members of council say in my previous life as a Ward 3 councillor and now, you know, I love this project. I think it's great. I think it would be great for the community, but my community associations aren't going to like it. So I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. You all vote in favor of it. I'm going to vote against it, and then everyone's happy. Right? Like, you've seen this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, and I'm not ratting out any of my colleagues, but this happens on a regular basis. And as a matter of fact, when I got elected in 2017, that was one of the first things that somebody said to me. Look, there's going to be times that you love something, but your communities aren't going to love it. Find a friend. Get them to move it for you. And I thought, that's not how I operate. I'm not going to do that. And so we need more people that think like this to do jobs like this. Because if we're always being a chicken pants about what our community is going to say, you're never going to make good, compelling decisions. So let me ask you, does anyone remember this thing called the guidebook? Did everyone shake a little bit when I said that word? Yeah, it's traumatizing for me to say that out loud. I was the chair of Planning and Urban Development Committee at that time, and it was a public hearing with 80 registered speakers. And we listened to all of them. Good, bad, otherwise, it didn't matter. We listened to everyone. We heard what they had to say, we asked questions, we thanked them for their time, and it was fine. And then it went from committee to council and became very, very ugly. There was a campaign that was launched by some people with deep pockets to talk about how overnight we were going to change the zoning on the lot next to you, and you would wake up with an 8-story building beside you. Has anyone built anything that quickly? No, right? There was all these fallacies that were put out there, and there was these falsehoods that were put out there as well about eliminating single detached homes. And that became the fixation point for everyone. I can tell you when I ran for mayor, this group asked me to come and speak and engage with them, and I did. And the very first question, and I knew what was going to happen for the rest of the questions, was, hi, I'm a young professional, and I want to own my own home. And I want to know why you hate me so much that you don't want me to have a single detached home. Well, I stuck around for the rest of the hour and took many questions like this, but the fear that is created about something different and change coming into your community makes politicians very nervous when we make decisions. So I think, you know, as the person kicking off the panel, I'll just state the obvious. You need to think about who you're going to vote for, how qualified they are, and what kind of courage they have to make good decisions. Calgary right now is at a very pivotal point. We made a good decision about downtown revitalization, and we started filling those spaces with homes instead of just headquarters. We're going to need to do that in established communities as well, and it's not always going to be pretty. I'm looking at my friends who have gone through this with me. But you need to have strong leaders, and we need you to advocate with us. Please come to those public hearings. Tell us the good things as well. So I'll pass it down now.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Mayor Gondek. I'm Joe Case. I'm Vice President of Mattamy Homes. I am keenly aware that I'm the only purely suburban developer on the panel. Yeah, thanks, Alex. So I wanted to, and I agree with the mayor. The mayor, change is very difficult. And so a little bit about Mattamy. Mattamy is Canada's largest home builder. We're largest privately held home building company in North America. We've got offices across the US and Canada. Came to Calgary in 2013, and we fancied ourselves a little bit of a disruptor. So we were going to challenge the status quo and do things differently in the suburbs. And so we tried to do a number of things. First and foremost was look at the residential cross-section that's built, designed by the city, and then built across the city by developers in suburban neighborhoods. We had an alternate cross-section that we had been building in Airdrie, of all places, bastion of innovation, Dumal. The cross-section allowed us, by just a simple tweak of taking the shallow utilities, so the gas, the electric, and the fiber, out of the private property, there's a right-of-way on everybody's front yard, put it into the road right-of-way, allowed us to increase our yield of across the subdivision without changing anything else by 7%. And when you're looking at a quarter section, that's 75 houses. It's not insignificant. We did it for 2 phases in our first community in Cityscape before it started to be decline. And eventually we had to wave the white flag, and we now build complete streets. The complete streets cross section, which is good. It's a good cross section. A lot of attributes to it, but it's not perfect. But it's one example of change and trying to be a disruptor in the suburban context, thinking that you're doing something that is desirable for the city, and then getting an enormous amount of pushback. So along with the politics of it, there is also the entrenched design, and status quo has a lot of inertia behind it. And so you need a lot of people, you need politicians, you need administration, and you need industry all pulling in the same direction for change to happen. So privileged to be on the panel. I hope I can offer a good suburban perspective.
Thank you.
Am I answering a specific question or just overview here? I could go for hours on that.
No, you only have 5 minutes.
I know, okay, yeah. I think Mayor Gondek obviously did an excellent job, and I'm excited to have her here because, trying to sum this up, for me, I think about 3 key pillars to see radical change. And for me, the first thing is education. I think oftentimes, we see polarities and we see fear as a tactic to kind of drive decisions. And I think it's imperative that we educate not only students, but I think residents as a whole. And I think the lack of education and its availability and access is so important. And it's one of the key things that people need to understand in order to comprehend change when you talk about growth and patterns and shifts. And for me, I think, we're not being asked to deliver exactly what residents want today. As industry members, we're being asked to deliver things that are not on the paper, that are not real yet. It's kind of what I see our job is. And so I think we need to understand that our best decisions come at 4th and 5th level thinking. It's not the first thing or the second or the third. And so although residents today may know what they want, I think we can take that data and information, but it's our ability to manifest the things that we can't see or touch that we need to create. So I think education, without question, is the thing that I think is really important. Mayor Gondek is here, council members are here. I think leadership is one of the big pillars here. And I think, the mayor summed this up really well. I think we all know, especially them, as professionals and as elected officials, know what needs to be done. I don't think the question is whether or not, we have a fragmented way in which we're growing in some of our cities. I think, we need our leaders to be leaders and to be there to make tough decisions, and that's why they were voted in. It's not about us, they hear all of us, they hear our concerns, and it's in those moments that they need to make those decisions and not defer them or prolong them. And so I think leadership, at the council level is absolutely critical. But then also I think, us as industry members are not showing up as leaders. We're not creating advocacy. This is an institution that has an incredible voice, and I think it's absolutely critical that we be leaders and we lean on our professionals to actually talk about, why is it more sustainable to grow within established, or why is it tough to continue growing on the outskirts? And I think, we can all sit in the room as educated folks talking to each other. That's not going to solve the problem. We need to create more access to this information. I think that's a huge barrier, and I think that rolls into the third thing for me is, advocacy. We have a lot of groups that are very well organized when they don't want something, that are affluent, that have money, that have the ability to go through the broken and fragmented system of sitting, waiting to speak. But when you talk about, a renter or a single family or a single parent household, the model doesn't allow for people to actually get engaged. And so it's very difficult to say that we're creating, diverse or inclusive communities when we've never had diverse or inclusive voices at the table. And so I think we need to, take a real hard look at our system and decide if the voices we're hearing are the voices that represent those communities. Ultimately, for me, it's about making tough decisions and doing it in a more fulsome manner. The moment that we choose communities or we prioritize, make exceptions for different places, we've actually made those places less inclusive. And we've created an unparalleled system. And so that's where I would start.
Thank you. Thanks, Al. My name is Alex Ferguson. Worked painfully in this city in multifamily for all my career, and I'll talk a bit about that. I've also made multifamily an experiment of my own life. I've had 3 kids in a condo in Vancouver, and I've gone to kids' parties, 1-year-old, 2-year-old, those parties in condos, and I took that perspective as an experiment of my own life. I moved back to Calgary, and I'm from here, and I'm a Burntlandian, like Al has been. And it's a cool neighborhood that he's helped make really cool, and I built a lot of housing there too. And I think a couple things is this city, when I moved back in 16, when I left the city in 10, I'm like, this is the best city in the world. Then in 16, I came back and I'm like, oh my God, this is not fun anymore. And I think that like a real simple story for me though was, yeah, I'm not that political either, sorry. But what it is I went to Old Beautiful this summer, I'm like, something's happening. And I think what the real story is we've got big population coming in. More importantly, there's something that we can't quite see today, but something's changing the city. It's turning into a kick-ass place to be in Canada. It's got a lot of advantages going for it. I joined Anthem in May. We bought an office building in the Beltline at 4th and 11th, and it's an old-time office building, which we're gonna, basically we bought it for the same cost as our rent in Bentall Centre in Vancouver, central Vancouver. It's 1.5 years of the rent. We bought an entire office building, and we're gonna use that as a huge attraction to bring staff in, get young minds in at Anthem. But what I wanted to talk about is the challenges of densifying a city, especially in Calgary. And there's some really weird things that you have to take into context that are reasons why my career hasn't been super successful in some projects. And at Anthem, we have projects that are sitting quiet, and that's what I've been brought in to do, is reawaken them. And I think one of the big things is we have the Earlton site on McLeod Trail. It's got the building permit will die on February the 5th. We asked for a refund the other day. And what we're gonna do is we gotta reimagine that site. And that site, just to give you context, is it's about 887 units. We've got $30 million in that project today. And that project's gonna take $125 million of equity to get it to go. That's capital partners and ourselves. And then it needs debt. The total cost is about $500 million to build it. So the point is these multifamily projects, the reason why they're tough is they suck a lot of money, and the capital structures are quite different from debt than single family. They're just more rigorous. So that's one of the big things that we have. Another thing that we have in Calgary it's a hard one to see is, and this is a tough statement to say, but houses are actually quite reasonably priced or cheap. It's a really affordable town still. For the most part, we haven't seen house prices go up in 10 years, let's say. It's shocking. It's bucked a national trend, and it's all tied to the oil and gas sector and that overhang. But I think that's what's creating the excitement here is when things are inexpensive, you can get in, people can take chances with rent, like Village Ice Cream is a good example. Rent's out of your place. But what it is in Calgary for houses, we have the CBC site. We were planning to do townhouses there. But at the cost to produce it today is the same price as a house right across the street. So that sets up a challenge. Multifamily needs breathing room and price bands to make it work. Vancouver is not the ideal state, but if you're to do a townhouse in the inner city of West Side Vancouver, you've got $1 million benefit over the single families that are there. So what it gets to is, it's not just a lifestyle choice in Vancouver, it's a necessity. That's why you see this huge projects they're able to go. There's this pressure, 60,000 people a year going there, and it just keeps, there's a very dynamic market, so is Toronto. So you got this transferable product, cheap housing, and then from there, you really get into like Calgarians' preference. And this is the mind bender for my own brain, is I have 2 projects in my portfolio. One's in my own company and one's part of Anthem. 1,800 square foot large format condos downtown at Waterfront, and then I've got 1,800 square foot bungalow villas in Curry Barrows. And you can see the preference of our city and the appeal to make of our city is a bit of lower density, and I think that's something that's the underpinning, and I've been fighting it my whole career, and you can feel it. It's and I think that we're in a design period shift to post-pandemic. I think you can see this, there has been a move to lower density. Bridgeland's a great example with the rental that's gone in there. It's close to downtown, but not downtown. And it's been phenomenal to see the buildings rent up and the amount of energy that's changed in that neighborhood. And the last point that's a challenge is time. And Bridgeland's another good example. It was 2001, I think Sturgis and the group put together the master plan for that. We're at 2023, there's still a blank site there that's waiting to roll. And it's just taken time, and I've lived in that community since that time period. And so it's just, Yaletown's the same story. I think Yaletown's now 30 years. So I know a lot of people in the room want to see a lot of things happen quickly, but it's all predicated on humans coming to Calgary. And we just came out of a period where humans weren't coming to Calgary. And we're in a period where it's really exciting that we're seeing a lot of people come here. And I think the city's at a really, it's a very exciting point in the city for me, for a person that's rode all the waves of Calgary. And I don't know, I love this place, and I'm glad to be here.
All right, I've got slides. So I'm not from Calgary. You got those? It's all right. That's it. Oh, perfect. So hello, everyone. Let me start by stating that I'm an advocate for the uses of architecture and design in the grand project of gradually but decisively transforming or retrofitting the unsustainable, inequitable, inefficient, and increasingly obsolete aspects of metropolitan Northern America. Places characterized by suburban form that is built to be single-use, auto-dependent, and relatively low density. So places like this, in the image, could be, next, this, or alternately, this, next. Yes. So we need both re-greening and compact redevelopment and infill. And you can imagine both of these images I just showed you were formerly like the first. So my message is that suburban form, built form can and urgently must be retrofitted for increased social equity and resilience in the face of climate change and other forces. And that many more stewards of the built environment, including my fellow panelists here, should be taking up the challenges, and many of you, I hope, could join in. As it stands, there is a lot of latent opportunity in already urbanized places, particularly in commercial areas. Big box stores, office parks, gas stations, golf courses, motels, and strip malls. The before use of this particular site. So too often, places that on paper or in planning documents might seem to be built out actually have a lot of capacity for creative retrofitting transformations. So next. In New York City, where I'm from, it contains perhaps a surprising amount of suburban form in the outer boroughs. So maybe not in Manhattan, but there's a lot more of New York City than just Manhattan. So here at downtown Far Rockaway Village, a failed auto-oriented strip shopping center on the edge of Queens is being replaced with 1,700 sorely needed units of deeply affordable rental housing and supporting spaces. 20% of the residents of this beach-adjacent but very remote neighborhood live in poverty, and 75% are from visible minorities, mostly Black and Latino. So I cite this as an illustration of the tactics of redressing gaps in the public or civil realm in response to the urgent challenge of leveraging suburban social capital to promote equity and justice. Next. The first example I showed earlier is an illustration of the tactic, so this is the same site, of depaving and introducing soft natural systems infrastructure to better manage stormwater in response to the urgent challenge to add water and energy resilience. So here in the downtown of working class Meriden in central Connecticut, a creek was erased from the visible downtown landscape decades ago, diverted into an underground concrete culvert with a shopping mall built over it. This was in the urban renewal era of the early 1970s. So the site flooded frequently and catastrophically, as you can see in the lower left news photo. So next, it was all demolished and the creek daylit. And my research is doing case studies of these projects, of documenting, kind of writing them up, diagramming them like this. So the creek was daylit or restored to flow on the ground surface. The land was regraded into a basin and regreened as a stormwater park called Meriden Green. And then that's ringed with new affordable apartment buildings on the surrounding higher ground. There's also a new train station there and increased frequency of transit. So the spanning bridge in the photo there indicates the neighboring ground level. So the park itself is kind of, can fill up when there's a big major storm. And next. So briefly, a final example. This is from Austin, Texas, which is a current US boomtown with perhaps some similarities to Calgary, perhaps. So these before and after figure field diagrams illustrate the expected extent of infilling of parking lots around a series of older office park buildings in this place. So next image. So zooming in, the domain has become Austin's second downtown. So this is where downtown is booming and kind of filled up. So sort of the spillover here. And it's a case study of the tactic of pursuing urbanism as an amenity to attract employers and then diversify the site with housing and other things. It's fueled by light rail. To conclude, the end game over time is significant redistribution of residential and built density and uses into many discrete centers of varying sizes, efficiently interconnected, with more resilient landscapes and places in between. So it's not just adding more density, it's kind of shifting the density around, and better connecting it. This is a process my collaborator Ellen Dunham-Jones and I have defined as incremental metropolitanism. So that's what we call it. Through suburban retrofitting, supported by good governance, progressive planning and environmental policies, and responsible real estate development tools and financing, we posit that existing metropolitan areas can sustainably accommodate projected population growth, demographic changes and the different preferences that go along with that, and the introduction of new and diversified uses without increasing the overall footprint of urbanized land area. And I think that's the key piece. We can do all of this within our existing footprint. So just next slide. So just in summary, these are the 6 urgent challenges that we describe in depth in our latest book. I won't go over them, but some of them I already mentioned in my comments. So, thanks.
Thank you. So we have heard some of the challenges, some of what we're trying to accomplish, some of what we would like to see. One of the things that I have experienced in my research is that it's difficult. There are kind of two economies. The economy of housing in the inner city and what happens in suburban. And please correct me if I'm wrong here. But how do we make it that it is more feasible to invest and to develop in the inner city? And the first question goes to the mayor in terms of you have envisioned this strategy to repopulate the downtown, and it has multiple strategies around that. It's how to bring people back in, that investment back into the downtown. These examples that June showed, we have plenty of those spaces. We can all think of one probably at the top of our heads, right? How do you think that we can do as a city for municipal office, let's say, to incentivize that inner city development more than we have had in the past?
Well, I think it was an interesting experiment to create a municipal development plan that said we will grow 50-50. You know, half of our growth will be in established areas and half of our growth will be on the periphery. And we came up with models to fund the growth on the periphery through levies and investments, and we did not do the same in established areas. There's literally no funding source for that infrastructure that needs to be upgraded and changed and modernized for established areas to grow. And so that was something that was striking to me when I served on Calgary Planning Commission, but I didn't understand the depth of it. And so when I got on council and I began to unpack the budget, and I said, where's the funding stream for infrastructure in established areas for redevelopment? And the answer I got was, well, we don't have one. So we're going to have a series of city and industry working group conversations to come up with a model to do this. And I think everyone laughed at me when I said, can't we just put it in the budget? And no, what are you even talking about? You don't put it in the budget. Oh my gosh, we're going to have working groups, we're going to have focus groups, then we're going to have community engagement, and then we're going to do a bunch of other things that are not going to really get you an answer. So now, we kind of blew up the budgeting process a little bit this last year, and we're revisiting how we make decisions. And we're revisiting how do you invest the dollars that you need to show that you are an active partner in redevelopment. What I found with downtown is we put money into the conversion project, right? So we put in incentive dollars, and those got taken up immediately. We were oversubscribed immediately. So we took a chance and it worked. Let's take something away from that and now start investing in these established areas to redevelop them properly so that people actually get the amenities that are supposed to come with density. So that's a project that council's working on right now. Your budget is the proof of what you actually intend to do. And unfortunately, we hung our hat on a policy instead of the budget that should have accompanied it. So I think that was our number one failure. And that is something that we have to make up for quite quickly.
Great, that's perfect. Because that's kind of the strategy that can trigger that investment. Maybe Joe, you can add to that in the sense of what would you need to see more of to have that incentive for turning more products in the inner city.
You're asking the suburban developer? I could be. We do a lot of urban development in Toronto. I think it was impressive. So I think one of the other challenges that we face is the consumer itself, like the consumer. There is still a desire to see that single-family house in suburbia. I mean, like that's what we do, and I think there's a challenge that I think we as industry or the city has to sell the attributes of living in a more dense neighborhood, because and I think beyond policy, it probably has to start there at the consumer. If you can't convince the consumer that the inner city or a redevelopment area is a place that they should be living and raising a family, it doesn't really matter what the policy is you put. You have to. So I don't know how to answer that. That's a problem. I don't know how to answer. But but yeah, I think that we have to collectively figure out how we sell the attributes of inner city living better, because I think it needs to start with the consumer.
Maybe Al and Alex, you want to?
I think a couple things. It's people want to live in the inner city so they can walk and go places. And to some extent, a criticism of Calgary that I personally have, not representing my companies or anything, is Calgary's a city that does big things all the time, everywhere, every time. That's what we're really good at. And a critique of the program could potentially be that we're putting energy maybe in too many spots, and it makes it hard from, let's say, the funding point of view to create the things that matter. Like a bathroom matters, a community center matters. If you're gonna have kids in a condo and the weather's terrible, this is what they do in Vancouver. This is all the money they took of the DCCs and stuff, and they put them into community assets. People are going to hang me in my industry for saying this. And also, the other thing I'd say is get rid of zero lot line housing in the suburbs. But I know you don't, so save space. But those are things that artificially incentivize single-family houses in the suburbs, which I don't have a problem with. I live in a single-family home down the street. But my point is you've got to make places that you're going to go to for a reason. There's going to be retail, shopping, quick service, and it's going to have something else, like say a community center or something special. Bridgeland's an example of that. When I first saw all the drawings, I'm like, there's no way people are sledding on that hill and having concerts. And then this summer it actually happened. So it took 20 years, but it's because we got to a critical mass, concentrated effort. It's still missing some big engines, like the community center is kind of like half built, and it's missing some stuff that could be better for it, but they did put those things in. The community center is used. So there's not a simple answer for any of these problems, but those are my general views. But hopefully it's settled to talk about build or about next.
Sure. Yeah.
There you go. Good. Can't wait to see this.
Yeah, I think we have the answer, and I think we have the tools. I think Joe is wrong. Like, I think there is I think there's an incredible desire for people to live within established communities, and I mean, we can't produce housing fast enough to house the folks that want to live within these communities.
When you say we, is your company?
Yeah. Well, me personally, and I think the industry as a whole, like, if you were to take the Alberta rental market, less than 8% of it is 3-bedroom housing, just talking rental specifically. It has the lowest vacancy rate than any other form of housing within the last 20 years. So when you talk solely about like demand, there is an excessive amount of demand for family-oriented rental housing, and I would say this is a national thing that everyone is looking at. So the challenge that we have is, Alpine Park is being built on the peripherals right now. It's 20 minutes away from the city. It's 630 acres. Dream contacted us and said, hey Al, you could do 500 townhomes and I could get you started within 6 months to the ground, shovel ready. It takes us 3 years to build, to be able to actually put a shovel in the ground with row houses within the established neighborhoods. And so our city is one of the most progressive in terms of the policies that we've created for missing middle housing. But the reality is there's no certainty over delivering that housing today. So every application still needs to come before council. They still have to vote. And then after even that process that you get that doesn't mean the neighbor who's unsatisfied can't appeal your development. And so it's actually, the limitation of bringing in a Mattamy or a Brookfield is that why would they ever take that risk? And the mayor had said this, we do an exceptional job in new growth, like an exceptional job. They know how to make money, they know how to deliver those homes, we know what the payback is required, we know that what the investment is required, but in this established neighborhoods, we're kind of starting from scratch. And so, what it's going to take is to make it more affordable or attract more of the larger industry folks, is we have to reduce the barrier to entry, and we need to decide if we're not, guiding policy is great, but at some point we have to decide if we're going to, make the hard changes of saying, no, this can happen effective tomorrow in order for us to meet those growth goals or get anywhere close to the MDP. And I think that's only solving the first kind of part of this, and maybe you'll jump into it, but housing affordability for end residents within the inner city is going to continue to be a challenge if we talk about supply constraints.
Exactly, and that's in a way what I was talking about. There are almost two economies that cannot compete in a way, right? What you can offer in the inner city it doesn't have the same price range that what is being offered in suburban communities, and that, yeah, I mean that is difficult to compete with. And the other thing that is important that you mentioned here is certainty for development. This is something really that I try to talk to my students about, is the fact that if you're going to invest, you need to have that certainty, because otherwise you're not going to risk that money. Any one of us wouldn't do that, right?
This city is pretty certain. Like I just did a DP and got a DTR contact in 42 days. So we, being Anthem, we have worked multiple municipalities where we're buying land, zero certainty of what you're going to get out of it. So the one thing that sometimes Calgary beats itself up. So, and it's like we have no bikeways, or we're bad at city stuff getting through. That's not, from my perspective, it's not true. Like it's tough to sit here because the staff's working hard. They're making big time changes internally, and it's way easier than any other cities that we deal with in West or in Sacramento. And we're a big proponent of Calgary at Anthem, and we have great relationships with the city. And I would say we have much higher degree of certainty through the approvals process. The bigger problem is on the consumer side. Will they be renters? Will they be buyers? Those are the bigger challenges. And I know Al's these are different business cases. So yours is way stickier than the stuff we're dealing with, so we got to recognize that. But at the same time, you should see some of the stuff we deal with at Anthem at multiple municipalities. So I'm not defending Calgary. I'm not trying to get brownie points or anything. I'm just saying it's not that bad.
No, we actually are pretty good in many respects. But actually, June is a good opportunity for you to tell us about some lessons that other cities have learned about this process of bringing more of that development to the inner city.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I'm thinking about here is how, and this is a challenge in many places, moving beyond a kind of this or that or zero-sum framing of these questions. Is it the inner city or is it the periphery? And I think the incremental metropolitanism framework we've been using is to say that it's not a zero-sum game, or it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, that there is a lot more diversity, I think, in the market and in the preferences than we might assume. Often people purchase what's available, and maybe they're pressured because that's the best investment, not what they personally want, or maybe something they want just isn't even available. So I think recognizing the need to have a great diversity of choice and avoid any opportunity to kind of set groups against one another. I think when we're looking at the retrofitting of the demographic perspective, I think looking into the future, older people are living longer. The folks who are in the detached houses in some of these subdivisions, how will they age? What will they be like a generation from now? What needs will people have once they've reared their children, right? But might want to stay in those communities. So this idea of already imagining the evolution of some of those places and how they could be better interconnected. So what is the second, third, fifth kind of center or node or downtown in metropolitan Calgary, and begin to kind of imagine what amenities are going to be needed, how those places are all connected transportation-wise. And I guess one of the things that also comes up often is if you're focusing just on the housing cost, certain sorts of scenarios are more affordable, but there are all sorts of other kind of costs associated in the family or individual's budgets, and transportation, ease of getting to things, and so forth, that probably should be factored in. But what you've highlighted here, which I think is a huge issue, is the differential, first development cost from the point of view of looking at the opportunities to implement projects. So yes, definitely on the public sector side, how do those impediments get smoothed over or mitigated in creative ways for the benefit of all. And I think that's another piece of this is the costs are borne by everyone, right? Of these things. So those are just a few thoughts that came to mind.
Great, thank you. In that respect as well, like when we're talking about that it is definitely not one or the other, but it is this 50-50 idea that we have.
Or maybe it's like 30-30-30 or 10-20.
Yes, well, yes, you're right. Maybe 50-50 is too, very one-dimensional. But in terms from the city, Mayor Gondek, and Alex was starting to allude to some of this, are there maybe some major projects that could entice some people to move back to the inner city or to populate this inner city? Recently was reading about there's this, maybe you can talk more about us, a streetcar development in the US has become a way of bringing new development into not necessarily downtown, but areas nearby the downtown and facilitating that transportation, right? Because another thing we haven't talked about here, but everybody knows, is parking is one of our question marks every time that there is a development. So are there some projects like this that the city could undertake to support that inner city development?
Yes, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit differently. We tend to focus on built form and we don't focus on people. We have a strong tendency of doing that. And if you actually flip the question and you talk about what do people need so that we can then identify those projects, we've got all kinds of land. I mean, back there is Dante's Circles of Hell is what I call it. It's that parkade, the thing that's across from Superstore, right across from the municipal building. What even is that? Why is it there? Why do we not rip it down, blow it up, and put up affordable housing? We should, we can, and we must. So I think it's this idea of letting go of patterns and giving permission to our administration to try new things. I worry about our administration because we beat them up on a regular basis. We blame them when things go sideways. We criticize them on the floor of council, but we never support them to do weird new things. And we've started that. We've started doing that over the last 15 months, and I'll tell you, it's uncomfortable for everybody because the number of times that I'll say, just blow it up and do it this way. And they'll look at me and say, that's nice for you to say. I don't know that we can actually accomplish that. So now, we've gone back and given them the permission space to try new things. So when it comes to affordable housing as an idea, and I know I'm off topic, but we've gone to administration and said, identify some sites that we don't need. We will go to those business units and explain that they don't need to hang on to this because 50 years from now, we might need a park there. Let's build those houses. I'm going to give you a very specific example. Up in my neck of the woods in Ward 3 in Panorama, there's a school, a middle school, and across the street from it is this ditch of green space. And right behind it is all kinds of multifamily housing. And there's row houses, townhouses, there's condos, there's rental, there's everything. It's beautiful. But there's this green ditch thing. It reminds me of, the pit in Parks and Rec. It could be something. It could be so much more. So I have been pushing this site for over a decade, and I think we might be at the place where we can say, hey, the community association has a license of occupation on that land, but they don't have the capital to build a facility. So what if we tasked a housing provider to ensure that the community has space in whatever you build, that the community has a meeting space, they have office space, storage space, and a rink, or whatever, doesn't matter, some sort of amenity, and we build 75 units of affordable housing and create a retail environment at the bottom so we're generating some income from it. Wouldn't that be great? And staff is excited because now they know that they have support and they can think creatively. So, to answer your question in a bizarre way, we have all kinds of places that we can do some great projects, but we hinder our teams from doing really good work. And to your point, we hinder developers from doing really good work because we have these standards that have to be followed. I was on Planning Commission when Mattamy came forward with something that was better than complete streets, and we said, no, it doesn't follow our policy. So we've got to get better at understanding how to think more creatively and really deliver on the product that's needed.
Great, thank you. Actually, it was going to be a transition question to Joe, exactly that. And we even had this research project with Joe in Mattamy that looked at a new way of thinking about suburban parks, right? And we encountered some of those challenges as well. So for you, I'm guessing you agree with Mayor Gondek in terms of what kind of barriers, but are there other barriers? Like what would you like to see in terms of making those suburban communities even better?
Yeah, and I agree with Mayor Gondek, and I'm cognizant that there are members of various administrations in the audience tonight. So, but I agree. I think that they get beat up a lot, and they're terrified of making a mistake because the ramifications are relatively large, whether it be for transportation or a park or whatever. Like somebody's building something that's going to have a legacy, and so I think there is a culture of conservatism in not politically, but like in administration from taking risks. And I think that the number of times that we have been told no, it's disheartening. Like it's disheartening and defeating on projects like the one that we worked with you on. I cannot tell you how many checks we've had to cut to cover the city's ass for trying to build something great, in case there isn't a community association to take it over in the future. And I get it, but like risk mitigation cannot design good cities. Like we are in the business of taking risks, and the city has to join us in taking those risks. And I'm certainly happy to hear over the last 15 months that you're empowering people to make decisions or maybe take risks or think outside the box, because it hasn't always been there. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Alex, actually, I wanted to ask a question as well with some of your projects. I'm not so sure if you were involved in what is a rental multifamily that is along Memorial Drive. That I believe it is from you guys, right?
Yeah, that's one of ours. It actually shows to the confidence that the owner, Eric Carlson, has in the city of Calgary. And they went ahead on spec and they built a rental building called Aspen and Bow. And it's a great asset. Al's right. That one thing that's going to be really interesting in the data that comes out in the next few years will be Calgary's got 73% home ownership rates. It's the highest in the country by quite a bit. And everyone, like if that moves 1%, it's a huge move. And what's happening is the cost to build communities, the cost to build these buildings get more expensive, and the barriers to get into housing is way higher. Like when I bought my first house in Bridgeland, it was $163,000, which is almost laughable today. But rental's a huge component of it. We've got a huge strategy for rental. There's sites that we're going to come back into the city and the CBC we're going to reimagine. Will come in as probably apartments. And we're working through, we're very early stages of that. But every project we look at, the 10-year type rentals on the program, and the company has a strategy to develop over 5,000 rental units.
Because rental can be also another one of the solutions for housing affordability, correct?
I'm really passionate about rental housing, and I think I've worked in Seattle a lot, where you see these huge capital flows that went into rental. We built, the prior firm was we had the 7th largest transaction of a rental building sold in America in 2017. It was $240 million. So it's really important part of the continuum of housing. And the housing is not, everyone's like, oh, the housing market's a triangle. It's actually not, it's like a diamond. A lot of people are in the midsection, and it's all wage-based. And what's happened is Canadians actually suck at rental housing. So Americans are amazing. They're like, we're gonna put giant TVs and make it fun. And Canadians, because we're conservative in nature, and there's a social stigma around it too, where renting it's changing. But we haven't made great rental communities yet. You don't have operators like the big US operators in here doing that. So I think that, it's a really important, just look at Blackstone's portfolio, how important it is. So it's important to our company. We have rental components in our large multi-tower projects. Every tower project will have a rental, social housing. These are massive projects, like at least 1,000 units, 7 tower projects. But you're seeing a lot of things we're talking about here, the continuum of those types of things are in one project. But Vancouver's been at that for 30 years. You go to Cole Harbour right now, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the country, and they are building a school and social housing that's probably the center ice site of Cole Harbour right now. So, and they're thinking differently maybe the approach, but I'm gonna get hung by my colleagues in this industry, so I better shut up.
Well, I know he's a joke, but one of the things that I think is important about the panel and this opportunity is that we need to have this conversation and say these things, right? It doesn't mean that we're going to have the solution right now, but having these conversations drives that potential creativity and future solutions. That's what I was bringing the streetcar idea. Yeah.
I just want to endorse the rental conversation, and I think even framing rentals as affordable housing, it's the similar issue we've had with transit being associated with people, use transit because they can't afford the private car. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think there's many people in different stages of their lives which just prefer to not have the kind of constraints of ownership in housing as well, and would be willing to pay more for a smaller space if it's in the right location, maybe not only young people, but an older cohort as well, wanting to downsize, if it were available with the right amenities and in the right location.
Thanks. Yes, exactly. And I think we still have a lot of land that can take advantage of our existing rapid transit system. We see plenty of areas around all of the LRT stations that could be reimagined to some of the examples that you showed. So again, there's those opportunities, but getting to the land is always the challenge. First, getting land before that. Al, I wanted to ask you. You mentioned before that that you see proof that there is this desire for different kind of housing, right? Do you see that kind of, or that profile of customer very different than what it was in the past? Or is this something that is the same profile, we're just changing the way we want to live?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I should address administration because I feel like they'll think I'm going to hate them. I don't hate admin. I love working with the admin here at the city. I feel like they're a partner. There's no question. And so, I want to make sure I acknowledge that I'm not anti-admin by any. I'm actually more anti-council than I am admin. So I would flood them with the issues. I don't blame you folks at all. I actually don't envy you for having to answer to them either. Sorry, back to your question. In terms of, there is no question a demographic shift that is starting to happen, where we're starting to see young people, prioritize flexibility and convenience over, long-term, ownership. And so we're starting to see folks who are not thinking about staying in the same home, for 10, 20 years, or the same community for that matter. And you think about, what the pandemic has done from our ability to work and how we work and the ability to take on other jobs. And so I think, we've seen such a huge demographic shift in how people live and work, and we need to acknowledge how that happens. And so, we're definitely seeing families renting more so now than we ever have, which I think is really interesting. And I think, when you talk about the affordability and access that creates is enormous, because it wasn't there. And I think the one thing that hasn't been mentioned is, the federal government, CMHC, has put in billions of dollars towards the private and the public sector to help unlock more housing. And I think if we can kind of get aligned, like the mayor has said, about creating more, land opportunities and working in private-public partnerships. I actually met with Reds yesterday about that same example, about taking these assets and figuring out a way to deliver housing, more affordable housing. So I think the profiles are shifting. I think people are actually more accepting and inclusive than they've ever been in terms of what they would like to see in their communities. And I think the one thing for me that, Alex said Anthem has done it and they've done a great job at it is we need mixed market housing. And I think that's the biggest challenge that I see is, I grew up in a multi-generational household. Like my plan was for my parents to stay with me for as long as they could, and unfortunately they've passed. But I think we need to acknowledge the fact that if we can keep people integrated in society, our seniors, our affordable housing, living closer together in closer proximity, that is going to create the best type of communities that we possibly can. And Alex brings up Bridgeline a lot. It has a significant number of affordable housing, and the idea of leveraging the private and the public to deliver both of those needs, to me, is an incredible opportunity. We're seeing it prioritized, and there's so much capital on the sidelines that we could get access to. And so I think the consumer preferences are changing. Alex talks about a 1% shift, and that's all we're doing, is we're talking about 1% changes incrementally every single day. And so we're seeing, like I said, an enormous demand. The population within these established neighborhoods, the people that are the most impactful are people who have been in these communities and are aging out of place, and so they're selling their land assets. And the real unfortunate thing is they have nowhere to go within these communities. And so if we can find ways to rehouse these folks and create housing typologies like the new HCO district, which would allow us to create housing forms for them to stay in these communities, that, to me, that's a huge win.
Yeah, really, really great point. We have some time for questions from the audience, so I think it would be important to give them an opportunity. Do we have extra mics?
Al wants to talk to the staff.
Yes.
Hello, thank you so much. There's a little button.
Yeah.
Magic button. Let's just go with the magic button. There it is. We got it. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, in particular, Professor Williamson. And I was born and raised in the Bronx, in Trogsdag, and I was, when I was 10 or 12 years old, I'm Tom Keene, I'm a professor with this modeling crew. I was allowed to ride the subway, I was allowed to ride the bus. There was one place I could not go in the Bronx, which was called the projects. When I looked at the Far Rockaway Village, a vision of the project was high crime, high drugs. And so then I went and looked at how they were going to decide who lives there, and it has to do with income. And for one bedroom, I think it's $22,000 to $24,000. How, and I'm thinking septet and things like that, crime prevention through environmental design. How are the people there going to avoid recreating the projects?
The example in downtown Far Rockaway, there's a lot of social support in that project in the ground floor to bring in schools, library, park areas. There's a brand new public library right on the corner there. So I think the sea change that's occurred is to integrate and connect things so that it's more mixed and not so isolated as was the model in the past, which we have still all over New York City and NYCHA, the supply of New York City public housing is vital to maintain. Now it all needs to be restored and repaired with no capital to do so. So that's a real problem in New York City. And I think there's some instances where there's more crime in those communities. There are others where that's not so much the case. It really kind of depends on where they're located in the city. But the fact remains, certainly in New York and across cities in the United States, and I think we find that here too. There's just not enough housing even to house people who do meet the minimum income, and a generation or so ago would have been able to find adequate housing, and it just doesn't exist anymore.
I think that's an excellent point. Like if you look at Stuyvesant Town, they've done around the Oval, they've done cafes and so on. So I'm just glad to hear they're doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you all for your candid responses this evening and conversations. I had one question that was thinking about townhouses, and Ali referenced the vacancy rates, the smart college they share with us from CNHC, so I won't dig into that. But there's this conversation around consumers, demand, and I keep looking at the title of this talk, which, the first word is rethinking. I'm just curious about how to inspire different imaginations of what's possible in Calgary. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and my life living in Sunnyside is so vastly different than my mother's living in Newport. Technically she lives in Sundance, different place. And her life compared to my uncle who downsized in the retirement from Newport to the East Village. And how that day-to-day experience is so different in the city that it impacts, I think, our understanding of what's possible. And even looking at some of those examples of the regreening and some of those, like the park is beautiful, and you showed the first picture of this, like a concrete monster. Like so much can happen and so much is possible in Calgary, and how might we inspire people, regardless of their different lived experiences, to think about our city in a different way. Like we can't shift, there are shifts in demand and what people are looking for, but then there are people who are still moving out to cityscape, and even in cityscape, they're moving into attached homes and not into single attached. So we're seeing those small shifts, but at the high level, it feels like there are different ideas of what's possible in the city. It's a very rambling question, but to rethink, we have to reimagine. So how can we inspire Calgarians to reimagine the possibilities in their own city?
I just want to briefly address this one, and then I'm sure others have thoughts. I think these are fabulous questions, and the first book that my co-author and I published was in 2008. One of the reviewers described our use of the before and after imagery was so important to us because that's the key issue, not just a beautiful project, but what it was before and how it was transformed. And in his review, he spoke himself of having suffered from urban imagination deficit disorder. We call it UIDD, like the idea that a shopping mall could ever be anything but the shopping mall with the parking lots all around it. But really, you come down to it, it's just land, it's acreage, right? That if you scrape it down and start it up again, we can change it dramatically. But I think using imagery, I also think of like popular media, and you mentioned Parks and Rec, the show Friends, like that era of the sitcom popular shows that showed young adults living comfortably and happily in these, amazing loft apartments that they couldn't have afforded on the salaries they had, but it helped, reflect like a new generation's desire and visualize it in a way that almost then creates a demand to produce those kinds of places. So I don't know what the next sitcom should be that would help respond to the things. I think even talking about these immigration, multi-generational households and how they have to kind of shoehorn themselves into houses that have been built around an assumed norm of a conventional nuclear family. So how do we then, instead of having people having to change their lifestyles to fit the housing that exists, to reverse that equation? It could be really, really fun, right?
Yeah. One thing though is like we do have we got kick-ass parks. Like the East Village is like, it's amazing. And I think the gap in the time they receive, like it doesn't add up, right? And the city's put an incredible amount of money into these nodes that are really special, and they're getting sticky. People are coming down. There's no washrooms, but so there's a trade-off. But my point is it's about to come, and what you're seeing is we've gone through a pretty brutal cycle related to energy prices in the city, and this city was kind of like in the back burners of capital partners, banks. There's no indication saying let's go put a big bet on that city. And like Eric Carlson went heavy. I'm like, what is he doing? But it takes people like that to go make those bets. And then the stars have to start to align, and I think it's going to happen. So I don't want to be critical that, like, this city's working hard to make some really special places, and they're doing a really good job at it. And I think once we get a little stronger marketplace, I think once interest rates are backing off here, the real estate market is very tight in here. There's no inventory. We've burned down a long time. We've built a lot. You should see some shifts that will start to fire back up those sites. And this summer was an indication when I think there was 5 Beltline tower sites traded. 3 of those went to a person that's going to do rental, and they're private groups. So I want to make sure that we get some things right. Like East Village is unbelievable, and other parts too. Like all this is amazing.
Yeah. It's a difficult question. I think in terms of we're talking about like a cultural mind shift. So it's actually it's a movement, and I think it starts with, are we willing to invest and double down in that strategy? And so like, you bring up the idea of townhome. Like I can't think of any townhomes that are available or vacant or not or even available for purchase like at any given moment within the established neighborhoods. Like every example of a row house development that's been built within the established neighborhoods is generally consumed. And so that has to lead us to believe that there is a population that is demanding that. And I would say we're seeing more families value living within these walkable communities. And we're actually seeing it on the peripheral. I don't know about Mattamy, but I remember going through the Dream presentation, how they've actually gone back to the lane-loaded corridor. So all the garages are now coming off the street. The houses are moving towards the front of the street. And it's pretty phenomenal. Like they're taking an old framework and applying it to these suburban communities, and they're building these suburbs denser, better than they ever had before into complete communities. I know Mayor Gondek talks about that. Is if we're going to continue to grow, which we will, we're a city of new growth. Like it's going to happen. Can we do it in a more meaningful way? And so I'm not necessarily only concerned about people living, within the inner city per se. I'm also concerned about if we continue to grow, how do we service that growth in a way that's financially feasible for us as a city, but also in a way that we know is going to create better, healthy lifestyles. And I think the big thing is like affordability within our established neighborhoods has to be a massive priority. We can't put people on the peripherals and then burden them with vehicles or the lack of transit. And so I think for me, those are the things that come to mind is I think we're there, and I think how we tell that story starts with the narrative of why these things are so important.
I appreciate after you told me you're wrong that you complimented the suburban communities for doing something well. Yeah, they're like your suburbs of 2020
He's talking about dream though.
I know. I challenge him to come to a Mattamy community. I'll happily take Al next week on a tour of Cityscape.
Let's sell the wide chalice now. More face
Yeah.
no
I'm not gonna sell the white chalice, but I do think that I think there's a lot of things that we do well in the suburbs, and I don't want to be a suburban defender or advocate or whatever, but I also think there's a lot of things that we can learn. I think that multi-generational housing, and I think Cityscape is such a wonderful, unique community, and it is exactly what you talked about, June, how we started that community in 2013, and we had an idea, we had market research telling it was going to be one thing, and then it ended up to be totally something different, and we have failed, we have learned, we have tried things over and over again, and it's turned into something that's absolutely wonderful. And we're designing houses around the people and the needs of the people. And like you talked about townhouses in Cityscape, I would challenge you, and I would challenge the city to do, instead of like a units per acre calculation on the community, do a people per acre calculation, because there are more people in single family houses in Cityscape than there are in multi-family houses, and it is multi-generational housing, and we have designed it particularly for that community, and I think there's a lot of learning that can happen as we try to do that, and keep people in inner city neighborhoods as well. So I'd be happy to take you on a tour.
I'm just going to add something to this. It took forever for Calgary to clue into the fact that you could build multi-generational homes. So I'm speaking from a Punjabi perspective. We live in multi-generational families, and I can tell you for time immemorial in this city, the Punjabi community would buy a traditional nuclear family home and make it work. And you would convert the office into the bedroom for, you know, the mobility challenged elder that was living with you. You know, the suite that was built in the basement was purpose-built for whichever family member needed to be there. And then someone came along and said, hold on, what if we actually built the home to accommodate 3 generations? And it was like, and it took off, and it was amazing. If we had just talked to people. And I'm going to compare your example of Cityscape to Monterey Park. When Monterey Park was built in the Northeast, it was this feeling that it was going to be this beautiful California-style suburb with these massive homes, and it's going to be really wealthy people that bought it, wealthy white people that would buy it, that would understand the California connection. That was the dream. And Ron Moore, I've had frank conversations with them. They said it was mostly Punjabi families coming in and saying, this house is huge, it's exactly what we need. And here's all the money you need for my down payment. I don't need you to get me financing because my 3 relative families and I can buy this house. And all of a sudden the light went on for them that they had imagined this wrong. And I think Cityscape was an interesting example. The reason you have so many people living there is because they work around there. They're either trucking, or they're working at the airport, or whatever it happens to be. If you forget to look at why people choose a place to live and how they need to live there, we will forever miss the mark. So for Northeast Calgary, we need to be smarter about the housing typology. We need to also understand that the value of home ownership is driven by generational input, that this is an asset. And I think we have to start talking about the fact that there's more financial vehicles out there than there ever have been before that can be your asset base. It doesn't just need to be your home. And that will debunk this home ownership mythology. And if CMHC could actually take the M out of its name and be the Canada Housing Corporation and actually fund good projects that are rooted in rental, and it wouldn't be such a dirty word, we might all be okay.
Great, thank you. I think that's a perfect, sorry, we're out of time, but that's a perfect segue to wrap up the panel in a way that there is, I think it's very optimistic city. I think we live in a city that has so many opportunities. We're doing so many things well as well. New generations are coming with impetus and lots of new ideas and reimagining some of those ways of living. So I want to thank you again for being part of the panel. Hopefully this is something that we can do on a recurring basis and bring you and bring others to speak about their lens and about what we can do in the future to continue to rethink that urban growth that we have in Calgary. Thank you everybody tonight for coming.